Hi everyone, welcome back to Get a Brew channel. Today we're down visiting Richard in Black Donkey. So Richard's going to take us around the brewery and tell us a little bit about Black Donkey. You're going to see behind the scenes. Come and check out the brewery. So this is just bottle storage, everything's bottle conditioned?
Yep.
So,
yeah, so this is finished goods ready to go out.
Okay.
And when we started out, we just occupied the rear half of the building.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why it's a bit of an unusual layout like that. The back of the cold room denotes the middle of the building.
Yeah.
And so it's effectively all production in the rear half of the building and then admin and stock in the front half of the building. We try and keep that linear flow going.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work, but you know,
that's the plan,
that's the plan.
Yeah. So we can see familiar Dave Porter kit, 1,000 litre setup.
Yep.
So explain how you tackle a brew day.
Yeah, so we have two hot liquor tanks. The wood-clad tank is the one that would have come with the kit originally.
Yeah.
This one was added. Now everything was pre-loved before we got it.
Yeah.
This had last seen action at a lager brewery in the UK.
Okay.
And we acquired it, put it in here. So the Dave Porter hot liquor tank doesn't have a lot of power in it, but it's well insulated. It holds temperature. This hot liquor tank is a German tank. It's got a lot more power in it, so it changes temperature. It raises temperature more rapidly. So that's kind of where we store water, and this is the active tank, if you will. I think we have it dialed in, and it's. I talk to a lot of other brewers who start at 6 in the morning and finish at 6 in the evening, and we don't do that anymore. But now we mash in at about 8.
Okay.
That's a two-man operation. So Glenn, who's not here today, but he's normally up here on a step ladder with a big paddle.
Yeah.
And I'm here with the barley on my shoulder. Once the mash is set, and we take our measurements and so on, then effectively it's a one-man operation from there on, mashing. The wort is then transferred from the mash tun to the kettle or copper.
Yeah.
And sparge water coming out of the hot liquor tank to bring us up to our target volume and gravity. Boiling goes on there. Depending on the recipe, we boil anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes.
Plate chiller then and then the fermenter? Yeah,
exactly. Plate chiller. Our cold liquor is just kept in tanks in the cold room.
What about water? Are you RO or are you treating it as you go?
No, we do mechanical filtration and we have a charcoal filter on the incoming supply.
Okay.
We're in a fairly unique sort of position, I suppose, that we're in a limestone area.
Yeah.
And the water we started brewing with 8 years ago was very, very calcium rich.
Okay.
To the extent that I was trying to find a secondary market for all the flakes we had to chip off the insides of tanks, you know.
Yeah.
But there was also a quality issue with that water, and the water authority determined that they couldn't correct that quality issue. So they just switched our supply. And we went virtually overnight from a calcium-rich, hard alkaline water supply to a soft, acidic water coming from the west of us. It played hell with us for a while until we kind of figured out. And there's actually one recipe that we haven't been able to get back to where it was and where we wanted it.
Okay.
We haven't brewed it since. But it's made cleaning a lot easier.
This is something we can use our friends at Murphy & Sons to help with. We'll get the water tested and get them to look into that for you. Conical insulated fermenters.
Yep.
Is this primary fermentation then? After we've finished with the process, it goes in here?
Yeah, exactly right. So primary fermentation in one of these 3 tanks. We have 2 ultra-modern conical jacketed tanks, and then we have one rather traditional sort of tank. That's an original Dave Porter fermenter, and the previous owners cut the bottom off it and put a cone on it.
Okay.
The cone isn't steep enough to really be effective.
Yeah.
There was no racking arm on it, so we had to add a racking arm.
Yeah.
There is a manway in the wall of the tank,
Yeah.
which is really a manway that's intended to go on the head of a tank.
Yeah.
So we had a bit of work to get that sealed up. In all reality, it actually does a pretty good job. We get good fermentations in there. The hardest part is because it's not insulated this time of year. It's about 4 degrees in the brewery right now as we're filming this. So we have to wrap a jacket around the tank to maintain temperature. But it works well, and the nice thing is you can observe it, but you can also walk past the tank and smell it, which you can't. You're completely insulated from the process with a modern tank.
With those tanks, obviously you could force carbonate, naturally carbonate, closing off, but you choose to do the bottle conditioning way.
Yep.
What's the thought process in that?
Well, part of it is because we have a finite amount of fermentation of primary space. In the cold room here, we have 8 1,000-liter conditioning tanks, just single wall tanks.
Yeah.
So if we complete the process right through carbonation in one of these tanks, it ties the tank up for too long.
Okay.
It bottlenecks our production, pardon the pun. But also, just my personal preference is I like the fact that when we hand a bottle of beer to somebody, we can say there is nothing added to this. It contains malt, water, hops, yeast. That's it. No industrial gases, nothing. And it's a very traditional method. We're a very traditional kind of brewery. We brew traditional recipes. We brew, despite the fact that we had a water change, tune our recipes to suit our water rather than the other way around. We do minimal water additions of salts or that kind of stuff. We use acid malt, not so much anymore as we used to, but naturally soured malt to buffer the mash pH, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So bottle conditioning is just a natural follow-on from that, I think.
Yeah. Right, let's check out the cold room. And the beer is transferred from primary fermentation in here for cold conditioning. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And then you package straight out of these, or do you go into a bright tank for packaging?
It depends. So if we're kegging beer, one of the tanks we have actually set up as a bright tank. So our kegs, for the most part, are force carbonated, and that's just purely and simply an efficiency thing that we need to turn them around.
Yeah.
But our bottles, we used to transfer from one of these tanks to a tank outside, and from there prime it if necessary, if we needed to raise the gravity a little bit prior to bottling, and then send it to the bottling line. But we simply invested in some longer hoses, so now we can complete that priming process in here. It cuts out a tank, it cuts out a cleaning cycle, cuts out losses in transfer. And priming, it gets a little cold in here, priming at 2 degrees, but then we just run it. We have this little door. When we built the cold room, we put the little door in the side of it. So that's, rather than going in and out through the main door and leaving it open, we just transfer the beer in and out through there.
Yeah, cool.
And it works very well. And these are the cold liquor tanks. So just 1,500 litres of water that comes in.
Keeps it nice and cool in here.
Keeps it nice and cool,
Because it's cool, nothing about.
Yes.
Into the warm room, I think is the, So your Framax bottling line, any issues with dosing the carbonation level correctly in terms of the priming sugar, or have you've adapted a protocol for each beer style, And
I think we have now. I'm not going to say that that's always the case. Obviously in the early days there were some inconsistencies, and even a simple thing like changing the type of sugar we use for priming, that can have an effect.
And again, the bottling's fairly manual, hand loaded, hand boxed, and then into the warm room.
Exactly.
Like, before we go in there, I can see you've got some nice oak barrels. This is something I love. I have a lot of interest in this. What are you doing here?
So these are the barrels. These particular 6 barrels are what we got for Sergeant Jimmy 2021 edition, which is currently available. Sergeant Jimmy is sheep stealer that has been matured in a whiskey barrel, but it's a very quick maturation, 2-3 weeks max. That's all it takes. Because we get these barrels, they're what's called B2s from Irish distillers, and they come in, they're still hot, plenty of whiskey residue left in them, and a relatively light beer like Sheep Stealer doesn't take a lot of contact time. But these barrels, when they come in this year, typically we only use them once, and then they become planters or furniture or what have you. These barrels, when they came in this year, they were different. The residual spirit that came out of them was nice. It was sweet. It was there was just something different about them. And I said, we can't afford to use these barrels just once, or to be ashamed to use them just once. So what we did was we brewed a batch of Rua, which is our Underworld, one of our Underworld series beers, and we took it. The yeast we use with it, it ferments everything, so it takes it right down to 0. And we took it with about 10 gravity points left on it and put it into the barrels to finish fermentation of the barrels. At that time, it was September. So temperatures were starting to come down. It's been in there now for about 4 months. We just actually tasted it on Friday. It's good, but it's not good enough yet. It's not there yet. But this barrel here, this was a bit of a long shot. We brewed a beer, turf smoked saison, for a pub, and pandemic came and we were left with half a dozen kegs for that pub. And I was very hesitant to destroy them because it was a good beer, and we had a 6th barrel left over. So I said, we'll take that beer, which was Bogfire, and we'll transfer it into this barrel and see what happens. And we tasted that on Friday as well. And I'd be quite honest with you, I would like to put that barrel in the back of the van and bring it home.
Yeah.
The whole intent with Bogfire was I wanted to create a beer that tasted a bit like it had been matured in an Islay whiskey barrel.
Yeah.
And now that's what it tastes like. There was no smoke in the barrel. We added the smoke through the malting.
Oh, very nice.
But now that it has that barrel character, and it's just
like a Lafroig beer type thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just put that at the end of the kitchen table.
Yeah, that's the type of thing you want to see in a sharing bottle, that you sit down with a group of friends at winter time. So warm room is where the secondary fermentation takes place. You have charged the beer with a carbonation solution, usually a sugar, and then it's capped. Secondary fermentation takes place.
So we store our bottles in here as well, because would be completely alien practice for anybody who's bottling forced carbonated beer, but we actually fill our bottles warm.
Yeah.
And our sterilizing solution, sanitizing solution that goes into the bottles, that's also warmed up.
Okay.
And we did that because back in the old days we used to have awful problems getting labels to stick.
Yeah, I can understand.
So we also keep our labels in here warm as well.
Yeah.
And I've found that warm labels, warm bottles tend to work much better than cold ones.
Right, let's check out the off sales and have a little chat about the beers. And
This, by the way, see, this is an ex-Coca-Cola tank.
Yeah.
And we welded on this tri-clamp and
Yeah.
kind of made it so this is going to allow us to package single barrel batches.
Okay.
So we can transfer a barrel into here and then send it down the bottling line.
You're brewing a wide selection of different types of beer. What's your go-to beer? Is probably the best place to start.
They're all go-tos, but there was one that sort of reigned supreme with Sheep Stealer.
Yeah.
And this was the first beer that we brewed back in 2014. And it is, to all intents and purposes, a Saison.
Yeah.
But when I sort of went around other Irish breweries and said I'm going to brew a Saison, the general consensus was, yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
2014 in Ireland, a Saison was relatively unknown. So we changed it from Saison to Irish Farmhouse Ale, which ultimately it is.
Yeah.
And it's been that ever since and sells very well. It's I would imagine, it's definitely our best seller across all formats, bottle and draft. And then as time went on, we added a few more. Bucket was our second beer. We kind of call that Guilty Little Secret because it's an amber ale, so it's about as unsexy as a beer gets.
Yeah.
And yet people consistently come up and they go, oh, hey, listen, I love your bucket.
Yeah.
Shh, don't tell anybody. So we don't produce a heck of a lot of it, but we do produce it, we keep it in, and it's a great food accompaniment beer because it's got a sort of a rich malty character.
Yeah.
And it goes well with bold flavors and spicy foods. TKO, we kind of felt, I suppose, we did succumb to peer pressure a little bit that we had to produce an IPA, but we went for more of a sort of 20, 30 year ago California style IPA. So it's malty, it's got a nice bitterness, resinous, citrusy, not fruity. Definitely, well, it could be hazy if you shake it up because it's bottle conditioned, but we don't put anything in there to make it hazy. Yeah. And then Warrior is our lager, and it is an interesting study in beer, I suppose, in that it is almost the exact same recipe as Sheep Stealer, fermented as a lager as opposed to with an aggressive diastatic yeast. So you get about 20% less alcohol, 4.2% versus 5.5%, 5.6%. And up until the pandemic hit, we only did Warrior on draft for the pubs. Because the vast majority of pubs, their best-selling beers are lagers. Yeah. And when the pandemic hit, we had a load of it brewed and ready for kegging, and said, no, we can't keg it, so we'll have to bottle it instead. And it's actually been a pretty steady seller in bottles. And then we have Sergeant Jimmy there, which is our annual sort of release. We do it once a year, Sheep Stealer in a whiskey barrel. And then we have what I'm a little biased, of course, but what I personally think is the most exciting development in Irish brewing is Underworld.
This is the yeasts that you're harvesting from naturally, like caves, and you're taking inspiration from. Yeah,
100%. The whole thing came about, I suppose. People asked why was I brewing a Saison in Ireland? Why is an Irish brewer brewing a Belgian beer? And my response was, well, who says it's Belgian? Who's to say that Irish brewers weren't doing something similar 200 years ago? Yeah. And the missing link, what typifies a lot of Belgian brewing is the yeast character, which in a lot of modern commercial beer is exactly what the breweries are trying to steer away from it, because it's kind of the sourdough equivalent to your sliced white pan. Yeah. And that's what I like. And I said, well, we have a similar climate, similar sort of demographic, farm workers, rural sort of society and all that. Who's to say Irish brewers couldn't produce a beer
Yeah.
similar to the Belgians. The missing link was the yeast.
Okay.
So we went out looking for an Irish yeast just to see what wild Irish yeasts were capable of doing. And I'd be perfectly honest, we got very, very lucky in a cave about 20 kilometers from here called Owen Agat, which features very heavily in Celtic mythology. We harvested the yeast. It was actually found on the skin of a blackberry right in the entrance to the cave. The cave is a small entrance, you have to slide in on your back.
Yeah.
And as you go in, the hedgerow is right above your head. And there was this blackberry, and I got a sterile tube and snipped it and capped it and sent it off to the lab, along with a lot of other samples for analysis. And we came back with a few viable yeast strains, but that one in particular sort of had the right flavor characteristics. And as it turns out, because we had it analyzed subsequently, sent it off for DNA testing, and it is a diastatic strain, so very similar to a classic Belgian Saison yeast.
Yeah.
But the two labs we sent it to said that there was no 100% match in any of the yeast databases that they knew for this strain. So it
totally
was
unique
new.
too.
Yeah, absolutely. It had never been brewed with or described, catalogued, if you will, before.
Yeah.
So that was very exciting. And we decided to sort of brew 3 beers with it, the first one being Savage. It's, to all intents and purposes, a classic Saison, a very simple base of mostly lager malt, Irish lager malt, noble hops, and the wild yeast, which we call Morrigan.
Yeah.
Because the cave where we found it was reputed to have been the lair of the Morrigan back in Celtic mythology.
Yeah.
And then to sort of round out the trifecta, we produce Alta, which is a pale ale, but interestingly fermented again with a diastatic yeast, so very dry, nice crisp sort of fruitiness to it, using American hops. And then Rua, again, we were thinking, we put an IPA as the third member of the clan, and I said, no, we're awash with IPAs, we'll do something different.
Yeah.
And people associate Irish brewing with 2 beer colors, primarily black and red.
Yeah.
And so we decided to do a red one, call it Rua. But again, it's very different from what most modern consumers would understand to be an Irish red, because it's diastatic, so it's very dry. And the 3 of them, very interestingly, we created them because we wanted to create something sort of indigenous, domestic as food accompaniments that the restaurants could serve and sell, and give equal prominence to them as they do to their imported wines and their other more traditional drinks offerings. So that's kind of where they're pitched, and the response to them has been very favorable, very positive.
I'm very interested in this sort of, getting down into ingredients at a level, the locality of around the brewery. So like we did a spontaneously fermented wild beer at our own brewery recently because we wanted to see what was in the air. We don't know what that'll be like for 18 months probably. The fact that you've been doing this and doing it quite quietly is a credit. And probably the best thing to do now is say, where do the guys watching this buy this? Where do they get to try it?
Well, the simplest way to get it is to go on to blackdonkeybeer.com. We got a license to sell direct last year, largely as a result of the pandemic and having lost so many traditional retail outlets. So it's available on our website. It's also available from beerclub.ie. It's available from Blackrock Cellar in Dublin. It's available from a variety of off licenses here in the West. The bulk of our distribution to retail is in the west of Ireland, from effectively Athlone, Roscommon, Galway, that sort of area. And some of the other good online beer sellers are carrying it as well. And we're hoping to get it into all the best restaurants in the country over the coming 12 months, now that we're able to trade again.
This is an independent brewery. It's very much a two-man operation is probably the best way of putting it. And we would really encourage you to support Irish craft beer and independent Irish craft beers like Richard. So please check out his beers. We'll pop the link to his website below so you can buy some. Let us know how you find it. Let us know how you experience this, really unique yeast that's been harvested from a cave going in backwards. What else can you do but say, let us know what the feedback is. So thanks so much for today, for showing us around the brewery.
Thanks for coming. Pleasure.
And let us know what you think of the beers, guys. And until next time, happy brewing.